Hello, good morning, students. Today's topic of discussion for medicine is chronic kidney disease. I am Dr. Karthik, Assistant Professor, Department of General Medicine, Gayatri Vidya Parishad Medical College. So, the learning objectives for today's class will be definition of chronic kidney disease, the epidemiology of chronic kidney disease, etiology of CKD, what is the pathophysiology of chronic kidney disease, the clinical features, and then followed by management. Before going to chronic kidney disease topic proper, let us rewind about the physiology of kidney. As you all know, kidney has many functions. One of the important function being excretory function. Kidney is an organ of excretion. It excretes all the waste metabolites of the body metabolism. So, urea is the important waste product of protein metabolism, which is excreted via kidney. And also, kidney excretes many hormones, macromolecules, and different proteins. So whenever kidney is damaged, it results in accumulation of these molecules in the blood, and the levels of these molecules increase in the blood. So serum creatinine, which is a byproduct of muscle metabolism, and urea, which is a product of protein metabolism, accumulate in the body when the excretion function is defective of the kidney. Next function of kidney is regulation of blood pressure. Blood pressure regulation is done via renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. Whenever there is decrease in the blood pressure perfusion of the kidney, the low pressure is sensed by the renin-angiotensin system, and renin is released. Renin in turn causes production of angiotensin. Angiotensin, as we all know, is a potent vasoconstrictor which constricts all the vasculature. It also increases the sympathetic response, thereby increasing the blood pressure. And also it increases the absorption of sodium. Sodium together, whenever sodium is absorbed, it increases absorption of water along with it. This increased fluid intake leads to increase in the blood pressure in the intravascular compartment. The next function of kidney is fluid and electrolyte balance. So kidney plays an important role in maintaining normal levels of sodium and potassium. Whenever there is decreased sodium intake, kidney tries to conserve sodium and maintain the normal level in the blood. Similarly, kidney is an important organ to excrete potassium. So potassium excretion occurs in the distal convoluted tubule of the kidney. Whenever there is decreased sodium in the filtrate of the kidney, there is a tubulo-glomerular feedback mechanism, which again stimulates the renin-angiotensin system to increase the absorption of sodium in the proximal and distal tubules. So another important function of the kidney is acid-base balance. The organic acids in the body are also excreted via the proximal tubule into the lumen of the tubules. So whenever there is impairment in the function of the kidney, there is increased levels of acid in the body, leading to metabolic acidosis. And also bicarbonate ion is excreted via the proximal tubule. So this decreased, the increased amount of bicarbonate excretion also leads to acidosis, metabolic acidosis. And we all know calcium, kidney plays an important role in the hemostasis of calcium and phosphate. So calcium, the absorption of calcium is by presence is due to the presence of vitamin D, the active metabolite of which is formed in the kidney. The 1-alpha hydroxylation occurs in the kidney, and phosphate excretion also takes place from the proximal and distal tubules of the kidney. So as activation of vitamin D3. From the physiology, we all know that vitamin D, to become active, it has to undergo hydroxylation. 1-alpha hydroxylation and 25-alpha hydroxylation. 25 hydroxylation occurs in the liver, and 1-alpha hydroxylation occurs in the kidney. So the active metabolite 1,25 dihydroxycholecalciferol is produced in the kidney. And importantly, kidney also secretes a hormone called erythropoietin. It is secreted secreted by the interstitial cells of the proximal tubule of the kidney. So erythropoietin is responsible for, it stimulates the production of RBC. So these are the important functions of the kidney. So how do you assess? We have to know how to assess the physiology of kidney. Assess the renal function of the, whether the kidneys are functioning normally or not. To assess the renal function, we have to estimate the glomerular filtration rate. That is the rate at which the glomerulus is filtrating the plasma. So you all know the glomerular filtration rate is actually measured using inulin. But for all practical purposes, as the process cumbersome, we use serum creatinine as an important parameter to measure glomerular filtration rate. So this is also called estimated glomerular filtration rate when we use serum creatinine to calculate the GFR. So there are various formulas to calculate the GFR or estimated GFR or the creatinine clearance. This is called Cockcroft-Gault formula, where we use parameters like age, body weight, and serum creatinine to calculate the creatinine clearance. Similarly, the other formulas like CKD, EPI, these formulas are used in different studies, EPI study, and this is the MDRD formula. This formula was used in the study called modified diet and renal disease study, where they use this formula to calculate the eGFR. So in our clinic, for our clinical purpose, we use Cockcroft-Gault formula at bedside to calculate the estimated GFR. So as we have seen, kidney plays an important role in the electrolyte fluid and electrolyte balance. To assess the function of the kidney, we have to check for serum electrolytes and also blood gas analysis, which indicate whether the pH is maintaining or not, or is there any acidosis or alkalosis. Similarly, you have to do a urine examination. Urine examination is necessary to determine whether there is any excretion of proteins or blood within the urine, which indicate the etiology of the kidney disease. So renal function is assessed by the estimated GFR, for which we have to know the serum creatinine, and blood urea is used as the excretory capacity of the kidney decreases, blood urea increases in the blood. So an increased blood urea reflects the decreased function of the kidney. And we have also do the serum electrolytes, blood gas analysis, and urine examination. So on this background, let us learn the chronic kidney disease. As you all know, kidney disease can be of two types. One is acute kidney injury. Acute kidney injury is acute rapid deterioration of the renal function, which occurs usually within 24 to 48 hours, and it is reflected in the form of decreased urine output or increase in the serum creatinine. So whenever there is acute decline in the function of the kidney within 24 to 48 hours, you call it acute kidney injury, previously also called as acute renal failure. And chronic kidney disease or CKD. So chronic kidney disease is more an insidious onset disease where there is irreversible deterioration of the function of the kidney, which takes over long period of time, over years. So chronic kidney disease was previously called chronic renal failure. So kidney disease can be predominantly acute kidney injury or chronic kidney disease. Coming to the definition of chronic kidney disease. So the criteria for the definition of CKD for all clinical purposes, CKD is defined as an abnormal kidney function or structure which is present for more than 3 months and which has implications of health. So how do you know that there is alteration in the function or structure? There are certain markers of kidney damage, like presence of albumin, excess amount of albumin in the urine, that is albuminuria, presence of urine sediments, or as we have seen electrolyte or other abnormalities, and any abnormal biopsy, histological features, and structural abnormality through imaging, or any history of kidney transplant. These are markers of kidney damage. And we assess the renal function by glomerular filtration rate. Decreased glomerular filtration rate of less than 60 is considered as chronic kidney disease. So the abnormality must be present for at least 3 months, either in structural form or functional, to define it as chronic kidney disease. So usually kidney disease manifests only after a prolonged period of time. The clinical symptoms manifest after a prolonged period of time. Initially, the normal function of kidney, the initial manifestation is only biochemical abnormality in the form of elevated serum creatinine and blood urea. Following is the loss of excretory, metabolic, and endocrine functions of the kidney. Then, when the disease progresses towards the end, then we'll have clinical signs and symptoms of uremia. Uremia literally means urine in the blood. So the accumulation of toxic products in the blood is called uremia. Then we finally have end-stage renal disease. End-stage renal disease is nothing but a stage where kidneys are no more functional and the patient is ultimately going to die without any renal replacement therapy. The GFR is almost less than 15. So the normal GFR, glomerular filtration rate, is about 120 ml per minute per 1.73 meter square. When it becomes less than 15, it is called end-stage renal disease or stage 5 CKD. So initial stages may manifest only as biochemical abnormality or some endocrine abnormality or metabolic abnormality in the form of anemia or hypertension. And when the patient progresses stage 4 and stage 5, we will have clinical signs and symptoms of uremia and finally end stage renal disease. So the risk of progression. So there are two factors which indicate that there is progressive damage of the kidney. One is GFR, another is albuminuria. The more the amount of albumin or proteins in the urine, the greater is the risk of progression of the kidney. So CKD is an irreversible deterioration. So once any inciting insult which starts the spiral of the damage of the kidney, it continues even if the initial insult is treated. So depending on the eGFR, we classify the CKD into 5 stages. So stage 1 is where eGFR is more than 90 ml per minute and there is kidney damage. How do you assess? By using the markers of kidney damage. In stage 2, the eGFR is about 60 to 89 ml per minute. In stage 3, the eGFR is 30 to 59. It is again divided into two stages, A and B. A is the eGFR between 45 to 59 and B is between 30 to 44. Stage 4, where the GFR is between 15 to 29 and less than 15 or the patient on dialysis, you term it as stage 5. Stage 5 is also called end-stage renal disease. So depending on the presence of albuminuria, these stages of CKD are again classified as A1, A2 and A3. So if there is less than 30 milligrams per gram of excretion of albumin, it is called A1. It is the A1 stage, and there is 30 to 300 milligrams per deciliter or gram, it is called A2, and more than 300 it is A3. So this 30 to 300 is also called microalbuminuria stage, and more than 300 is called macroalbuminuria. So a patient with G1 and G2, first and second stage with A1 is of low risk to progress into chronic end-stage renal disease or to face complications. Similarly, G3 and A2 belong to the category of moderate risk. Then G3B, G4 and A2 and A3 and A1 belong to high risk and very high, and G5 belongs to very high risk of progression into end-stage renal disease or needing to renal transplant or presence of complications. So we have seen what is chronic kidney disease, what are the stages of chronic kidney disease. Now the epidemiology of chronic kidney disease. So CKD stage 3 and 5, the estimated prevalence worldwide is 5 to 7%. In India, it is about 1 to 13%. And the most common cause of CKD is diabetes and hypertension. Then above 75 years, about 1/4 of the population have eGFR less than 60 ml per minute. So with age, there is decline in the eGFR. From 30 years onwards, there is about 1 ml per minute decline in the eGFR from 30 years onwards. So by the time you reach 75 years, the eGFR is almost 60. So if this, along with the presence of markers of kidney injury are present, then you call it chronic kidney disease. So chronic kidney disease is an important and independent risk factor for cardiovascular mortality and morbidity. So before many patients progress to stage 5, they die of cardiovascular disease. So what are the etiological causes of chronic kidney disease? The predominant cause is diabetes, which accounts for 20 to 40% of the cases. And then interstitial diseases, tubular interstitial diseases, which account for 20%. Then glomerular disease, then glomerular disease which accounts for 15%, followed by hypertension 15%, and then systemic inflammatory disease like vasculitis, systemic lupus erythematosus, which cause about 5% of CKD. Then renovascular disease cause 5% of CKD. Congenital diseases like Alport's and adult polycystic kidney disease, they constitute about 5% of CKD. And there are some kidney disease where the etiology is not known. They constitute about 5%. In our locality, we have the Uddanam kidney disease, which was categorized as kidney disease of unknown origin. So this comes under the last 5% of the etiological factors. Coming to the pathophysiology of chronic kidney disease. So initially there is an renal injury or initial insult, followed by, with any insult, what happens? The body tries to compensate. So with it, as the nephron number decreases, the estimated glomerular filtration rate also decreases. So in order to increase it to the normal, there is adaptive hyperfiltration at the glomerulus. So there are several mechanisms by which the kidney itself can increase its GFR. It is in the form of increased permeability of the glomerular membrane, and second one is the activation of the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. So renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system increases angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 is constituted of the efferent arteriole. We all know the filtration at the glomerulus occurs because of the pressure difference between afferent and efferent arteriole. So in order to increase the intraglomerular pressure, to increase the filtration, there is constriction of the efferent arteriole. This occurs due to activation of renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. So this increased pressure reflects as increased glomerular filtration rate. This is the adaptive mechanism uh, by the kidney to increase the cope up with the decreased glomerular filtration rate. But when certain stages reach, these adaptive mechanisms become harmful to the kidney. So with increased glomerular permeability, all the proteins which are not filtered previously are filtered and reach the tubules, and also the macromolecules and the hormones which are not filtered previously reach the tubules. So this leads to increase in the protein in the urine. So this leads to proteinuria. And we have already seen that renin-angiotensin plays an important role in the maintenance of blood pressure. So increased angiotensin 2 levels causes vasoconstriction, increased sympathetic activation, and increased antidiuretic hormone levels, which cause hypertension. So the proteins and the macromolecules which filter down into tubules ultimately lead to inflammation and remodeling. So these two mechanisms, which are initially beneficial for increasing the glomerular filtration rate, over a period of time cause inflammation and remodeling, ultimately leading to damage to the rest of the nephron, leading to decreased EGFR, decreased urine output, and systemic complications. So once the kidney function deteriorates, there is accumulation of toxins in the blood, which produces the systemic complications. So this is the pathophysiology of chronic kidney disease. So what are the clinical features? As we have already seen, up to stage 3, the disease is almost asymptomatic, or it may manifest as only hypertension or sometimes anemia, and the progression is very slow. Only at stage 4 and stage 5, we have the clinical symptoms and signs of kidney disease. The symptoms include edema of feet due to fluid overload. Whenever there is increased RAS, activation of RAS, there is excessive retention of sodium, and along with sodium, water is also retained, leading to increased intravascular volume, which causes increased hydrostatic pressure, and then edema, accumulation of fluid in the extravascular space, leading to edema. Then they have anemia, generalized weakness, as potassium is predominantly excreted by the kidney. Decreased kidney function leads to hyperkalemia. And stage 5, where end stage renal disease, where we have all the symptoms of uremia. The symptoms of uremia could be pruritus, anorexia, weight loss, nausea, vomiting, hiccups. And when there is metabolic acidosis, we have Kussmaul's breathing, which is rapid, deep breathing. And there is muscular twitching, fits, drowsiness, coma, which is also called uremic encephalopathy. And all the complications of the uremia. So the frequent symptoms are fatigue, lassitude, which are due to anemia and inflammation. And due to increased deposition of calcium phosphate and increased parathormone, we have rash, pruritus, and deposition of calcium, that is metastatic calcification. Due to hypertension, anemia, and vascular calcification, we have increased incidence of heart failure and stroke. And in CKD, there is decreased function of the white blood cells and low cellular immunity, leading to infections. There are other features like anorexia, nausea, vomiting, where the mechanism is unknown. There are certain menstrual abnormalities like dysmenorrhea, menorrhagia are seen, which is due to hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis dysfunction. And neurological features are also seen like neuromuscular excitability, cognitive dysfunction, and peripheral neuropathy. So all these features are seen predominantly in the stage 4 and stage 5 of CKD. So what are the complications of chronic kidney disease? So as we have seen, kidney plays an important role in sodium balance. So alteration in the function leads to retention of the sodium and along with it volume overload. Then we have potassium excretion. When it is defective, it leads to hyperkalemia. So the inadequate excretion of acid leads to metabolic acidosis. And then calcium phosphate imbalance will lead to, that is, decreased excretion of phosphate leading to increased levels of phosphate in the blood, which in turn stimulates the parathormone. So there is increased parathyroid hormone levels. This is also called secondary hyperparathyroidism. And there is decreased calcium levels. One is because due to decreased production of active vitamin D, decreased absorption of calcium, and precipitation of calcium phosphate. So the intravascular calcium is decreased as it complexes with phosphate and gets deposited. And there's decreased vitamin D. So the erythropoietin is predominantly secreted from the kidney. When erythropoietin levels are decreased, it leads to decreased proliferation of stem cells to form RBC and leading to anemia. So this acidosis in turn leads to increased catabolism and weight loss and decreased protein synthesis and increased bone disease. The presence of acidosis accelerates the resorption of the bone. So the abnormal calcium phosphate hemostasis leads to what is called renal osteodystrophy. So whenever there is impaired renal function, there is decreased production of 125 hydroxyl calciferol, which leads to decreased absorption of the calcium from the intestine. And this decrease causes decreased plasma calcium levels, which in turn stimulates the parathyroid gland, leading to hyperplasia of the parathyroid hormone and secondary hyperparathyroidism. So calcium acts on parathyroid gland by calcium sensing receptor. Whenever there is low calcium, it stimulates the hormone. So impaired renal function also decreases the phosphate excretion, leading to increased phosphate levels in the blood, which also stimulates the parathyroid gland to produce more amount of parathyroid hormone. So increased parathyroid hormone causes increased osteoclastic activity and stimulation of FGF23 molecule, which increases resorption of the bone, releasing calcium into the blood. Similarly, decreased vitamin D3 translates into impaired mineralization of the bone. So all these factors together lead to increased bone absorption and leading to the manifestations of renal osteodystrophy. So other entities of bone disease caused by renal disease are osteomalacia. So as we have already seen, decreased vitamin D leads to impaired mineralization. This is called osteomalacia. And there is another entity called adynamic bone disease. Adynamic bone disease occurs when there is excessive supplementation of vitamin D or calcium. This leads to decreased parathormone level, not an increased parathormone level. So these patients with adynamic bone disease they, they have improper healing to minor fractures. They have severe body pains because of impaired secretion of parathormone into the blood, which is necessary for repairing of the bones. So renal osteodystrophy, bone disease caused by CKD can be renal osteodystrophy, or it could be osteomalacia, or it could be adynamic bone disease. Then anemia. What are the causes of anemia and CKD? So as we have already seen, there is decreased erythropoietin levels and there is decreased absorption of iron in patients with CKD. And there is decreased survival of RBC in CKD, and there is capillary fragility and poor platelet function in patients with CKD, leading to abnormal bleeding. All these factors contribute to anemia in chronic kidney disease. And also, uremia itself is toxic to the bone marrow, so it leads to decreased production of RBC, leading to anemia. Anemia of chronic disease is always normocytic and normochromic. So, how do you manage chronic kidney disease? First, we have to investigate and determine the stage of kidney disease. So, we'll do serum creatinine urea levels and calculate the EGFR to know the stage of kidney disease. Then we have to do a urine analysis to determine the proteinuria. Proteinuria indicates the risk of progression of kidney disease. The more the proteinuria, the greater the risk of progression to kidney disease and cardiovascular death. And then hematuria. Hematuria indicates the etiology of the kidney disease. So hematuria is seen in conditions like IgA nephropathy, which cause the important cause of chronic kidney disease. Then we have electrolytes. The electrolyte imbalance is manifested in the form of hyperkalemia, and the blood gas analysis reveals acidosis, decreased bicarbonate levels. We have to do serum calcium phosphate, and parathormone levels. This is to assess renal osteodystrophy. In chronic kidney disease, the parathormone levels are elevated, indicating secondary hyperparathyroidism. Phosphate levels are elevated, and calcium levels are reduced. So there is hypocalcemia, hyperphosphatemia, and secondary hyperparathyroidism. There may be decrease in the levels of albumin, indicating chronic inflammation and malnutrition. Then we have to evaluate the presence of any anemia. Anemia is evaluated with complete blood counts, hemogram to know the type of anemia, serum ferritin levels, serum iron, ferritin levels, folate, and B12 levels. These are also done to exclude other causes because there is malnutrition. Anemia could also be due to other causes in CKD. Then we have to estimate the risk of cardiovascular death in patients CKD, for which we do the lipid profile and evaluate for any diabetes. The imaging techniques like renal ultrasound is used to image the kidneys to rule out any obstructive uropathy, that is obstruction at the distal end from the distal tubule to the urethra, which is causing the chronic kidney disease. And small kidneys on ultrasound imaging always indicate chronicity. So small kidneys on renal ultrasound indicate chronic kidney disease. If there is asymmetry of the size of the kidney, it may indicate renal vascular disease or any developmental anomalies. So if the patient is in stage 5 and we are planning for renal transplant, then we have to screen the patient for hepatitis B, hepatitis C, and HIV. And then we have ECG. ECG is done to rule out any pre-existing cardiac disease or to know the changes brought by the hyperkalemia. So hyperkalemia, as we all know, manifests as different ECG manifestations. So we have the initial manifestation being tall peak T waves, followed by increased PR interval, increased QRS duration, then asystole. Okay. These are the investigations which you do in a patient with chronic kidney disease. So what are the goals of treatment? So once the patient is diagnosed to have chronic kidney disease, we have to monitor his renal function to know whether he is progressing and how far, and we have to, the main aim of monitoring the disease is to retard the progression of the disease. So we monitor the disease to prevent or slow further progression, and we have to limit the complications. As we have already seen, there are so many complications of kidney disease. One of the goal of treatment is to limit the complication and then treat cardiovascular risk factors like hypertension, proteinuria, and prepare the patient for renal replacement therapy if needed. So once the patient is CKD, he is bound to progress to stage 5, end stage renal disease. So we have to be ready to initiate renal replacement therapy when appropriate. So as you can see in the graph, this is the profile of a patient. As the years progress, there is gradual decline in the EGFR. So there is decrease in the EGFR and and progression of the kidney disease. So we have to monitor the renal parameters periodically. Renal parameters include serum creatinine, protein. We have to do a urine analysis to determine the excretion of protein in the urine. So increase the more the albuminuria, the greater the renal disease is progressing. So it is better to plot a graph which indicate the progression of the disease in the individual. So how do you prevent further progression? To prevent further progression, we have to treat the primary disease. Suppose diabetes is the cause of kidney disease, then we have to maintain normal adequate glycemic control and treat the diabetes. So treating diabetes will help prevent the progression of the disease. Then we have to have tight control of hypertension. So hypertension must be controlled with various drugs in order to prevent the progression. Then we have to give drugs to reduce the proteinuria. So how do you reduce hypertension? So the drug of choice are ACE inhibitors and angiotensin receptor blockers. As we have already seen, the hypertension is due to increase in the renin angiotensin aldosterone system. So if you give an aldosterone receptor blocker, angiotensin 2 receptor blocker or ACE inhibitor, it will decrease the level of angiotensin 2 and help in the reduction of blood pressure. So the ACE and ARBs not only help in reduction of blood pressure, but also they decrease the proteinuria. So because initial adaptive response to decreased GFR is increased efferent arteriolar tone. That is vasoconstriction of the efferent arteriole, which is by the angiotensin 2. So this in turn increases the proteinuria. So if you block the angiotensin 2, the vasoconstriction decreases and there is decrease in the proteinuria. Especially in diabetic chronic kidney disease, ACE and ARBs help in slowing the progression of the proteinuria. Suppose the blood pressure is not controlled with ACE and ARBs, we can use a combination of drugs like calcium channel blockers or central sympatholytics like clonidine or prazosin to reduce the blood pressure. Initially, when ACE and ARBs are administered, there is increase in the serum creatinine levels because ACE and ARBs inhibitors, ACE inhibitor and ARBs, they decrease the EGFR. Initially, there is increase in the serum creatinine, and also there is increase in the potassium because angiotensin 2 helps in the excretion of potassium. If you block it, then there is increase in the potassium levels. However, the effect of ACE inhibitors and ARBs on proteinuria are much more beneficial sometimes than a mild increase in the EGFR. Suppose the serum creatinine increases by about 30%, then we have to think of stopping ACE inhibitors or ARBs, or the potassium levels are more than 5.5 milliequivalents per liter, more than 6.1, then we have to think of reducing the dose of the drug or to switch on to the another drug. So what is the target blood pressure in patients with chronic kidney disease? The target is 140 by 90 millimeters of mercury if the patient has minimal or no albuminuria. If the patient has macroalbuminuria or microalbuminuria, the target is 130 by 80. It is more so in patients with diabetic chronic kidney disease. So how do you reduce the proteinuria? As I have already said, ACE and ARBs, ACE inhibitors and ARBs are used to reduce the proteinuria and retard the progression of the disease. So we have to monitor serum potassium levels. So angiotensin 2 is a vasoconstrictor molecule which acts in the afferent arteriole. So angiotensin 2 constricts the afferent arteriole, increasing the glomerular pressure. So by blocking the angiotensin 2 by ACE inhibitors and ARBs, we decrease the vasoconstriction of afferent arteriole and decrease the filtration of protein into the tubule. So avoiding food which are rich in potassium. So as hyperkalemia is seen, in hyperkalemia it causes cardiac manifestations. We have to, in patients with CKD, food rich in potassium must be avoided. So food which are rich in potassium are fruits like bananas, avocados, vegetables like tomatoes, Spanish, potatoes, and sweets and snacks like chocolate, toffee, nuts, drinks, and salt substitute can be used. In salt substitute, sometimes potassium is used instead of sodium. So these substitutes have to be avoided. So how do they limit the complications of uh, chronic kidney disease? So what are the complications? Anemia, acidosis, renal osteodystrophy, and fluid and electrolyte balance. So we have to treat these complications at an early stage to limit further progression. So we have already seen anemia is due to decreased erythropoietin levels, increased absorption of iron, decreased survival of the RBC, and increased poor platelet function. So we treat it by giving erythropoietin stimulating agents like darbepoetin alpha and iron supplementation. The target hemoglobin should be 10 to 12 grams per person or 10 to 12 gram per deciliter. So this supplementation of erythropoietin is also associated with risk of hypertension. So we have to carefully supplement erythropoietin at about 0.45 micrograms per kg, and the target should not exceed 12 grams per deciliter, target hemoglobin. So how do you treat acidosis? Acidosis is treated by supplementation of sodium bicarbonate. So we have to give bicarbonate supplement, sodium bicarbonate, about 1 gram 8th hourly. The target is to maintain plasma bicarbonate more than 22 millimoles per liter. When there is severe metabolic acidosis, when the pH is less than 7.1, the patient has to undergo dialysis in order to in order to replenish the bicarbonate levels. So how do you treat renal osteodystrophy? As we have seen, the major mechanism for the disease process in renal osteodystrophy is presence of increased phosphate in the plasma. So we have to decrease phosphate in diet. So diet which are rich in phosphate must be avoided, like milk, cheese, fruits, vegetables, leafy vegetables. And then we have to give phosphate binders. So certain molecules which inhibit the absorption of phosphate in the intestine. They are calcium carbonate, aluminum hydroxide, lanthanum carbonate, and a polymer called sevelamer. These bind to phosphate in the intestine and decrease absorption. So there is no active vitamin D in the body. So active vitamin D metabolites can be supplemented, which increase the calcium absorption from the intestine, increase the level of calcium in the blood. So fluid electrolyte imbalance. So the first concern is to decrease the blood urea. So blood urea is a byproduct of protein metabolism. So we have to decrease the dietary intake of protein. And for hyperkalemia, as we have already seen, we have to reduce the intake of diet which is rich in potassium. There are potassium binders like newer potassium binders as zirconium, cyclosilicate, and patiromer, which can be used, which bind to potassium and decrease the absorption of the potassium in the blood. And then you can give diuretic therapy, especially loop diuretics, which increase the excretion of the potassium in the urine. Acidosis itself will cause hyperkalemia. So we have to treat acidosis with soda bicarbonate. And NSAIDs cause hyperkalemia. So it is better to avoid NSAIDs. Then sodium water retention. As the activation of RAS occurs, there is increased retention of sodium, and along with water. Along with it, water is also retained. So we should restrict the salt less than 2 grams per day. And in severe cases of CKD, we have to restrict water also. So diuretics are used to get rid of the excess fluid. The loop diuretics are more potent diuretics, and over a period of time, if the loop diuretics are not doing the job, then we have to go for a combination of loop, thiazide diuretic, and sometimes potassium sparing diuretic. So treatment of the cardiovascular disease. So we have seen that chronic kidney disease is an independent risk factor for cardiovascular death. So most of the patients before they reach stage 4 and 5, they die of cardiovascular disease. So cardiovascular disease is due to because of increased atherosclerosis. In chronic kidney disease, there is constant inflammation and increased atherosclerosis, which causes coronary artery disease. And there is hypertension. Hypertension itself is an important risk factor for cardiovascular mortality and morbidity. Hypertension causes left ventricular hypertrophy, and this left ventricular hypertrophy causes more of arrhythmias and heart failure. Then there is medial vascular calcification. There is calcification of vascular walls, and this process is accelerated by increased phosphate levels in the blood. So, left ventricular hypertrophy due to hypertension, and there is pericarditis. Pericarditis is a manifestation of uremia, and it sometimes leads to pericardial tamponade and then constrictive pericarditis. So when there is proteinuria, there is also dyslipidemia. So dyslipidemia in the form of hypercholesterolemia and increased triglycerides are seen in patients with chronic kidney disease. As we all know, increasing the cholesterol levels and triglyceride levels are an important risk factor for coronary artery disease and death. These have to be reduced by the use of statins. So CKD by itself is a risk factor for cardiovascular death. Hence, we have to adequately treat the risk factors, the complications of CKD in order to postpone or avoid cardiac mortality. So to summarize all the medical management that we have discussed till now for CKD, so the normal kidney function is sodium balance, maintenance of sodium and water. And in CKD, what happens? Sodium retention and fluid overload occurs. So you have to restrict the salt and you have to give diuretics. Then the potassium excretion is impaired, leading to hyperkalemia. So to treat hyperkalemia, we have to restrict the food rich in potassium in the diet. Then we have to avoid NSAIDs, and we sometimes in acute emergency we treat hyperkalemia differently with the use of IV insulin, IV calcium injections, calcium gluconate injections, and in severe hyperkalemia in stage 5 we go for dialysis. So the acid excretion is impaired into metabolic acidosis. So we have to give sodium bicarbonate. The target bicarbonate being 22 millimoles per liter. The calcium phosphate imbalance leading to one is increased phosphate levels, for which we have to give phosphate binders, then calcium supplements to counteract the hypocalcemia. And decreased erythropoiesis leading to anemia, we give erythropoietin stimulating agents and iron supplements. This chart summarizes how do you manage chronic kidney disease medically. So for every complication we have a treatment. Now coming to renal replacement therapy. So renal replacement therapy, when patient reaches stage 5 chronic kidney disease, when sustenance of life is not possible without doing a dialysis, then we opt for renal replacement therapy. Kidneys have been shut down and they can no more do their function. So without a proper functioning of kidney, ultimately the patient will die. Then we have to go for renal replacement therapy. Renal replacement therapy can be of two types. One is dialysis, another is renal transplantation. Dialysis is again of two types, hemodialysis and peritoneal dialysis. So hemodialysis, in which the blood is pumped into one of the hemodialysis machine and the blood is filtered of all the toxins. And peritoneal dialysis, where peritoneal membrane itself acts as a semi-permeable membrane for the diffusion of the toxins. And then renal replacement therapy, renal transplantation. Renal transplantation is replacing a new donor kidney is placed within the pelvis of the patient. So what are the indications of renal replacement therapy or dialysis in patients with CKD or for the AKI also? So one is stage 5 CKD with refractory fluid overload. The fluid overload is not responding to any amount of diuretics. Then there is refractive hyperkalemia. Hyperkalemia of more than 5.5, not responding with medical measures. And there is severe metabolic acidosis, pH of less than 7.1. And in the manifestations of uremia, the stage 5 CKD, uremic encephalopathy, where the patient goes into convulsions and coma. And there is pericarditis, uremic pericarditis, where an audible pericardial rub is heard. And there is severe uremic coagulopathy. There is platelet dysfunction in uremia leading to uremic coagulopathy presenting as bleeding. So these are the indications of dialysis or renal replacement therapy in CKD. So hemodialysis. Hemodialysis is the most common form of renal replacement therapy. So the blood has to be pumped into the machine. This is done via central venous catheter or presence of or with an AV fistula, arteriovenous fistula, or a synthetic graft. So what is the mechanism of hemodialysis? So as you can see in the picture, the blood is pumped into the machine and there is a fluid called dialysate. The dialysate runs in the machine. So there is diffusion of bidirectional from the blood into the dialysate and from the dialysate into the blood. Bidirectional diffusion of solutes across a semi-permeable membrane. And this diffusion occurs over down a concentration gradient. So the acids, the metabolic acids which are more, the acidic substances which are more in the blood are diffused into the dialysate. The bicarbonate which is more in the dialysate diffuses back into the blood. And the potassium which is excess in the blood diffuses into the dialysate across the semi-permeable membrane. So this process, the dialysis is done for about 3 to 5 hours a day and about 2 to 3 times a week for a patient with stage 5 chronic kidney disease. So this is a mode of dialysis. Hemodialysis is the most common form. So before subjecting a patient to hemodialysis, as there is risk of acquiring hepatitis B infection, we have to get the patient vaccinated for hepatitis B. The other method is hemofiltration. In hemofiltration, so the blood is pumped into the machine and there is a hemofilter. So the large volumes of water filtered from the blood across the semi-permeable membrane under the pressure gradient. So here the liquid is the excess amount of fluid in the blood is filtered across the membrane, and along with the fluid there is a phenomenon called solvent drag, where the excess solvent in the blood are dragged into the fluid. And when the blood leaves the machine, there is some amount of fluid is added, replacement fluid with suitable electrolyte composition is added to the blood. So this method is called hemofiltration. So it can be done as intermediate or continuous. So about 1 to 2 liters of filtrate is replaced per hour. So this is about hemodialysis. Then we have peritoneal dialysis. So in peritoneal dialysis, the peritoneum itself acts as a semi-permeable membrane. So a catheter is placed into the peritoneal cavity, and the peritoneal fluid is pumped into the peritoneal cavity. So depending on the concentration gradient, down the concentration gradient, there is diffusion across the peritoneal membrane from the blood into the peritoneal fluid, and then the fluid is again replaced or taken out after the session of the dialysis. So peritoneal dialysis can be of two types: CAPD, continuous ambulatory peritoneal dialysis, and APD, automated peritoneal dialysis. Continuous ambulatory peritoneal dialysis, it is done for the once 2 liters of fluid is placed into the peritoneal cavity in 4 to 6 hours. It is allowed to retain for 4 to 6 hours. So 4 cycles of CAPD are done in a day. So the patient himself can do the peritoneal dialysis. In automated peritoneal dialysis it is done only in the night time and once in the day, where the machine pumps the peritoneal fluid and then it takes it back. The problem with peritoneal dialysis is frequent catheter side infection and presence and occurrence of peritonitis, and sometimes the peritoneal membrane loses its capability of diffusion. So it is called peritoneal membrane failure, and sometimes there is sclerosing of the peritoneal membrane leading to intermittent bowel obstruction. So we have seen about dialysis now, renal transplantation. So renal transplantation, in renal transplantation, a suitable donor must be chosen. In a patient with stage 5 CKD, if we plan for a renal transplant, a suitable donor, compatible donor is chosen. It must be ABO compatible as well as HLA compatible. So predominantly HLA-DR. Then the donor kidney is grafted into the recipients in the pelvis, and there's anastomosis of the donor renal artery, donor renal vein to external iliac artery and external iliac vein. The ureter is anastomosed to the urinary bladder. So this donor organ is placed in the pelvis. The previous deceased organ is left in situ or sometimes removed if the organ is larger in size. So this requires the post-renal transplantation. There is immunosuppression therapy, because there is every chance that the organ could be rejected from the recipient. So we have to suppress the immunity of the recipient. It is done by induction phase and remission phase, where steroids, cyclosporin. Calcineurin inhibitors like cyclosporin, tacrolimus are given, and azathioprine or mycophenolate mofetil is given. It is a combination of three drugs: steroid, calcineurin inhibitors, and azathioprine and mycophenolate mofetil. So there is always risk of rejection of the renal transplant. The rejection can be hyperacute. That is, when the donor organ is rejected on the surgical table itself, or it could be within days, producing acute rejection, or within some weeks, producing chronic, or there may be graft versus host reaction when the donor kidney generates antibodies to the antigens of the recipient, causing graft versus host reaction. So this needs to be the renal transplant needs to be followed over a long period of time, and prolonged immunosuppression has to be given. So prolonged immunosuppression means there is obviously many more complications associated with renal transplantation. Prognosis, it depends on uh, the center which the renal transplantation is done, and the immunosuppression of the recipient in order to avoid the chance of any rejection. So renal replacement therapy is of two types. One is dialysis, which is hemodialysis or peritoneal dialysis. Then it is renal replacement, renal transplantation. So in today's class, we have seen it's chronic kidney disease. What is the definition of chronic kidney disease? Then we have seen the stages of chronic kidney disease, stage 1 to stage 5, where stage 5 is called end stage renal disease. Then we have seen the etiology of chronic kidney disease, where diabetes is the most common cause of chronic kidney disease. Then we have seen the pathophysiology, where the initial adaptive mechanism of increasing glomerular filtration ultimately lead to deterioration of renal function, and then leading to proteinuria, hypertension. Then we have seen the clinical manifestations, predominantly asymptomatic till stage 3, and symptoms appear only in stage 4 and stage 5. Then we have seen how to investigate a patient with chronic kidney disease with various biochemical parameters and renal imaging. Then we have seen the complications of chronic kidney disease, which are anemia, acidosis, renal osteodystrophy, fluid and electrolyte imbalance. And we have seen how to treat all the complications. And finally, and how to prepare for renal replacement therapy at stage 5, and what are the modalities of renal replacement therapy. That is dialysis, which could be hemodialysis in the form of hemodialysis or hemofiltration, and peritoneal dialysis, and then renal transplantation. So this finishes today's class. Any doubts, you can ask. So whenever there is hyperproteinemia, fluid tends to accumulate where there is loose areolar tissue. So in diseases where we have hyperproteinemia, in predominantly in nephrotic syndrome, where there is excessive loss of protein, uh, about more than 3 grams per day, we have a decreased oncotic pressure in the circulation. So this decreased oncotic pressure leads to decreased retention of fluid within the vascular compartment, leading to exudation of fluid into the extravascular space. Whenever there is hyperproteinemia, the fluid tends to accumulate in areas where there is loose areolar tissue. So the predominant, in nephrotic syndrome, the edema is most seen in the periorbital region, where the fluid accumulates first because of the loose areolar tissue. Hello, good morning, sir. Microalbuminuria is it clinically presented? Microalbuminuria is a laboratory finding. So it's only a urine. You have to estimate the urine protein levels, urine albumin creatinine ratio, or urine microscopic albumin. So microalbuminuria is when 30 to 300 micrograms of albumin is excreted per day. It can be only found out by investigation. So we have to periodically assess the patient with chronic kidney disease, especially in patient with diabetics. We have to do a yearly serum creatinine, albumin creatinine ratio to know any if they are progressing into any microalbuminuria stage. Presence of albumin and WBC indicates. So white blood cells can be present in many conditions in urine analysis. So it could be a simple infection, which will cause predominant neutrophils in the urine analysis. So urine nitrate is also positive in urine test. So if you have the more amount of WBC and 1 plus 2 plus 1 plus albumin, it could be a simple urine infection. Otherwise, it could be a disease. If you have 1 plus albumin in the urine, it could be about 1000 milligrams of protein per deciliter. You have to investigate for any nephritic or nephrotic cause of the albuminuria. Suppose you have eosinophils in the urine, it may indicate interstitial nephritis, an allergic interstitial nephritis to any drugs. So presence of WBC, what type of WBC and how much of albumin indicate will determine what is the etiology of the albuminuria in the urine, abnormal urine analysis. Somebody got just their urine analysis done and is asking many questions, isn't it? Okay, we'll end this session here. Thank you, everyone.